Hey gamers, Maniac here with GameAccess.net. I know I'm working on a couple of different videos right now, but for right now, I wanted to have a new video out because I figured it's been a while since I've updated the YouTube channel, and I had a new Tales from IT that I wanted to share in anticipation of what's probably going to be another Tales from IT down the road. So, what do you say we get started? I know we talked about Mac last time, but the truth is that a lot of people, a lot of the customers I have are in fact Mac users. That's just how it rolls. It's not a statement on anything involving Mac being good or bad. I've seen just as many Mac issues as PC in my time. So it's not saying that any platform is better than the other, because we're not going to have that discussion because it's not valid and it's not necessary. So my girlfriend is a Photoshop user. She's a graphic artist and she's a Photoshop user. So of course she has the Creative Suite installed on her MacBook. And a couple of years ago, she was having an issue with it. She would be using Photoshop, and then randomly she'd be getting a weird error message. Something involving scratch disk being full. That was the error message that she was getting. She looked it up. Nothing about it. She wasn't familiar with the term scratch disk, so she asked me about it. Now, I have grown up on the early versions of Final Cut Pro. And I know what the scratch disk is. It has to do with file allocation and space allocation for Final Cut, for basically video data being added to the hard drive. That's what scratch disk was back in the earlier versions of Final Cut. And that's what I learned on back around the year 2003, 2004, before obviously all my knowledge became obsolete. I was learning Final Cut back when they were still using VHS tapes. So go figure on that one. It wouldn't be until the next year that they would start teaching Final Cut on those digital video cassettes. And then later on, now I'm sure everybody's using Final Cut X. So go figure on that one. That's neither here nor there. So I knew the term scratch disk, but I hadn't heard the term scratch disk being used under Photoshop. And as far as I knew, Photoshop didn't use scratch disk, at least not that version of Photoshop she was using. So I started doing my own research on it. And I had discovered, to my girlfriend's unfortunate chagrin, that if her version of Photoshop, she was using Creative Suite 6, if her version of Photoshop was giving her scratch disk errors, then that likely meant that there was something broken with her hard drive. She was using a stock MacBook. I believe it was a 250 gigabyte model. Hard drive, 5400 RPM speed hard drive. Laptop SATA drive. She had been using that computer for going on about 4 or 5 years. It was highly likely that that drive was busted. Not impossible, but highly likely. And this was probably the worst possible time that she could be getting these errors, because she was working on having photographs edited and published for our Kineticon trip. When we went to Kineticon and reported on Kineticon a couple years ago. Hi, Leo. So we were really looking forward to having those pictures published and showing off the Kineticon stuff. And Kineticon was looking forward to receiving copies of our photographs. Well, our primary computer for publishing and editing those photos was now giving us issues. So what do? I do a full check on everything on that computer. I do a full system check. And I check the RAM, I check the main board, I do a full hardware scan. Hardware comes out okay. Not really getting any errors with the RAM, not really getting any errors with her main board. Those were fine. Those were fine. She was having issues with the battery. I think some of the sectors on her battery were a bit worn out. And her touchpad was completely broken. But other than that, the computer itself was fine. Or at the very least, giving me no errors. So we had backups. We ran backups. She had backups. She was using Time Machine backups. And so I said, you know what we'll do? I'll try to wipe the system. Like, I'll do a wipe and a restoration. So she was fine with that. I did a total system wipe. And then we did a total data restoration from Time Machine. Back to a slightly earlier version. She was still getting the errors. And with the more research that I was doing was telling me that these are probably error messages that our hard drive has failed. Now, in my experience, if the difference between hardware and software errors are this, and this is, by the way, something for any of you aspiring IT people. This is just in my experience. When you get random error messages like that, telling you that certain programs are giving errors and you have long codes and stuff like that, that can mean one of two things. One, your program is corrupted or your operating system is corrupted. If replacing the operating system or replacing the program solves the problem, it was a software issue. Two, those error messages can also be called up by bad RAM or a bad hard drive. How do you tell the difference? Well, there are RAM test software available. I know both Apple and Windows actually has integrated memory check tools into their system. Usually it requires a reset or a reboot, but they're there. What you can do is normally test the RAM. If the RAM is bad, you will get a huge error message. If you get an error message, replace the RAM. That's simple. If you get no error message, the hard drive's busted. It's that simple. In my experience, it's been like that 100% of the time. So, and I've been doing this for 15, 20 years. So, her RAM was fine, her main board was fine, battery wouldn't have caused that, broken touchpad wouldn't have caused those issues, and resetting and doing a factory reboot of her computer didn't fix the problems either. And so, we kind of figured her hard drive was probably busted. So, I bought her a brand new, or she bought a brand new SATA drive, 7200 RPM, 1 terabyte drive. So at the very least, if she was getting errors, she'd have a higher capacity drive at the very least. Now, she again already had her backups in Time Machine, so this was not like she was concerned about data being lost or anything like that. She had the Time Machine backups preserved. And her backup hard drive was relatively new. So there was no issue of those going bad. So I learned how to take apart a MacBook Pro for the first time, which you could do back then. You can't do that anymore. So I learned how to take apart a MacBook Pro, and I pulled the drive. I pulled the old drive using my screwdriver set and tools, and I replaced the drive with a new one, connected it up, turned it on, got a big error message, I have nothing, I can't boot, which is normal. Now, her MacBook was a model that used CDs for information boot. So I popped a disk loading CD in there and told it to load a backup from Time Machine. It pulled the Time Machine backup, installed Mac as well as all of her other programs, booted up her computer, and that was it. She never had a scratch disk error again. Not one. And for 3 years, the computer was fine. Well, 3 years later, apparently the warranty on those drives that she bought were 3 years. And unfortunately now, it looks like that new drive has probably gone bye-bye as well. And at this point, the computer just doesn't seem to be worth saving. So she decided that it's the better time now. You know, she's had the computer for going on 7 years now. It is, in a lot of cases, obsolete to finally replace it. I told her I could probably do a data recovery and data restoration for the data that she had backed up. But anything that hadn't been backed up, well, that's a story for another time. So she got a new, at this point she's happy. She's got a new Mac. She's happy with it. And stay tuned for part 2 where I talk about data recovery and data restoration on a new Mac. Till next time, guys, my name is Maniac with GameAccess.net. Take care. Over and out.